Hello everyone, and welcome to another tutorial on how to use properly one of my favourite Russian aircraft to be able to fly in the simulator, the Yak-40. And honestly, I just love flying this aircraft. It's really fun and also quite challenging. So today I'll be going through the basics of how to fly this aircraft. I know some people have got quite a lot of issues, especially since this aircraft starts up in cold and dark mode, which for some people who just want to fly the plane is not that great. I'll probably say this is sort of mid-range difficulty to fly, but honestly, once you know the basics of it, it's honestly so much fun, and one of my main aircraft to actually fly on the sim. So I absolutely love flying this plane. So we'll go through some of the basics. Firstly though, thank you to Missouri VA for letting me fly this wonderful model. A Polish VA airline I'm helping to do, and I'll be using this livery for it. So let's first jump into the cockpit. So now that we are in the cockpit, there's a few things we need to sort of realize. Firstly, one of the main things you'll notice is everything's in Russian, and don't worry, for people who don't know Russian, this is very easy to get overcome. Simply in the virtual cockpit here, you have this little panel, and if you just click on it, you can see everything turns into English, and also the standard units we know about, like knots. Instead of, if I re-click this, everything's in meters per second, or sorry, kilometers per hour, and these will be in meters. So if we just click this, we can see we've got feet and our normal airspeed that we're all used to. So first things first, once you load this aircraft, actually, one thing you need to do, which is very similar if you've ever flown any other Russian aircraft in flight sim, is open all the panels. So press Shift 1, this will take a while. You can see they talk about some stuff, and you need to press Shift 2, 3, and open all the panels. So this might take a bit of a while, and don't worry, this is normal, it's quite a complex model. So there we go. Oh, I accidentally clicked something. So after you've opened all the panels, let's got a few more here, just simply close them all back down again. And you probably notice I have got this GPS panel. If you don't have this, don't worry, this is a custom thing with the model that I've put in specifically, so don't worry about that. Just open up all the panels and reclose them again. So it basically just loads all the scripts to fly the aircraft. Now, one other thing you need to do before we need to start operating any systems is that if you turn your camera all the way around, you will see this panel here. Click on it, and it will get these sort of few switch boxes for the different electrical systems. All we need to do is right click them as so, and it puts all the rows up. Don't left click, because see that only puts one up. Right click all the rows so it turns on all the systems, like so. And you can just right click on the side and it also minimizes it, which is quite a nice feature. Now I'm using chase plane to get my camera views to quickly swap around, so I'm just going to come to the right seat, and this is where we're going to do some more of our stuff. So because we're going to be sitting on the ground for a while, I want to put the plane onto ground power. Now how I do this is I press Shift 0. Okay, so now we press Shift 0, you'll see a panel like this, and now all you want to simply do is click the external electric power button, and at the top you have a message saying it's connecting. So just give that a second and you can close this. Okay, so now that we're just going to give it a few seconds, I would say maybe 5, 10, 20 seconds, just to let the ground power kick in. So now, I don't know if you hear that. Now the ground power is kicked in. Apologies, I just quickly put the volume up a little tad, and we can now turn on ground power by clicking the bottom part of the switch. We get the bells, we get this yellow light on, which means we're on ground power. And you can see with these buttons as well, it depends on where you click them. So you want to click them in the right area. We want to turn on our left and right inverters. The emergency inverter, leave on auto, and these on here we also want to turn on. Here is our pressurization system. So pressure control backup is up to you. Air conditioning system we can leave on. Sound alarm system, system sound alarm we want to turn on. Air pressurization we want on, and these can go to auto, and same with this one down here for the bleed air. There is great documentation for this aircraft as any other Russian aircraft. I'm just going to go through what sort of flow I go through every time I fly this aircraft. And also, if you want to, you can lower the stairs at the back, so you can turn the master for it, and you can extend it. So if I go on the outside view, you can see that we have got our outside stairs extended. So we can go back on, and let's not forget that later on. I bet you we will. So now that we've got our electrical system on, we can now run through on how to actually start the aircraft. So swapping back over to this place, what we're going to do next is turn on the nav light, so everyone knows around that we've got electricity on. Simply this button here. And now we will start the APU. So how we start the APU is first, in our center panel, we need to turn on some fuel pumps. Now, usually a convention for all Russian aircraft is the left fuel pump that you need to turn on for operating the APU. And we can turn on our pressure gauges here. So now we come over to this left panel. You see APU fuel valve. We can turn it on. And while we're here also, we'll turn on some alarm systems. So fire alarm system, we'll leave this one off because we want to know if when the gear is not down on approach. We can get the gear anti-skid on as well. And that is it really. So now we've got this APU fuel valve light. And now on the left side, we see this box. Some people call it Pandora's box. I've seen some other Russian people call it. But basically this is where we control the start features. So if I get the right camera view, there we go. You can see that we have got a whole bunch of switches in here, and don't get scared, it's really quite simple. The top part is the APU system, and the bottom part is our engine system. So this in Russian means AI9, it's just a type of APU system on board, and then you've got the AI25. Yeah, so this just, all you need to know is the top part is the APU system, the bottom part is the engine. You can see at the top, again, sorry for my bad Russian pronunciation, but I believe that's Zapuk. All this basically means is start. So we put that into the start mode. We also want to put this into the start mode. You can see also if you ever get stuck, you can highlight over it, and you can see that it will hopefully give you a bit of a hint on what these mean. But this is basically start mode. God, if my Russian serves me right, I believe this is like I believe this is maybe one of these is either a fan mode, but you don't need to worry about it. I've never had to use it. So what we have to do is put it into start mode. Now we have got the run and the stop buttons. So we need to hold down, click and hold the start button for around about 8 seconds. So click and hold it, and we should hear a noise. There we go. And now, if we change my panel view, we can see that it now says APU Start on this panel, and this is our temperatures. So we can see our temperatures are starting to rise for the APU. So we need to let this completely go in, and we'll have some more lights appear in just a second. So while we wait, there we go. So now we've got our APU on and the APU pressure as well. And that means that we can now use the bleed air for it to start the other engines. So I'm just going to turn down the volume very quickly because this can get quite loud. So before we start the engines, I also just want to go through some different parts of the aircraft that would be useful for when we actually come to fly it. So of course, if you know your basic instruments, we've got here on the left is our airspeed indicator, our attitude indicator. This here can be a bit confusing for some people, but in Russia or most Soviet aircraft, they actually have the slip indicator along with the vertical speed indicator. So here all we've got is our turn rate in yellow, this yellow line. We've got a little ball here that you're probably familiar with, it's also here as well. And we've got our vertical speed indicator. Here we've got our radio altitude indicator. which we'll turn on in just a second. Over here is our altimeter. You can see that it's in the imperial units down here, so we can actually use metric if you click actually on the dial, so it appears here. You want to hover over it and you can see that we get this tooltip where it's also got in pascals and also in inches of mercury, so that could be useful if you're flying a VATSIM and you want to set that easily. So you can remove this by closing. Now on the left here we got our G-force meter, so currently we're at 1G, and these are different limits, the red. Here we've got our VOR, or also glide slope indicator, which we'll go into a bit more detail. This can be a little bit confusing or frustrating for newcomers because they think it's not working, but honestly you have to like click this hidden button, which I'll go through later on. And also we've got our compass here, which is this little point. We've got our ADF needles, or you can also put these to VORs if you want to, but usually this will be for ADF. Our fuel, we can also check how much fuel is on it. You can click it either left to right to see how much is in the left and right tanks. I believe on the outside is what's in the tank together when it's in the sum mode, and then the outer ring is for when you do it in left and right. So for example, we're at around about this setting, added together. For the outside ring it will add up to that, I think. But you don't really need to worry about that. Here we've got our backup indicator as well. In the center console we have got our we've got our RPM gauges in the middle, our percent of N1 and also N2 be notified by Roman imperials. We'll see there's actually two needles here, just there on top of each other. Here we've got our temperatures, our gear indicator. This is our trim indicator over here, so if I change the trim you can see that it moves up and down, so we're just going to neutralize that. And our flaps indicator. And the Copilot has got basically the same as the left, apart from some generators which we will use in just a second. Here in the center we've got our fuel delivery system. So let me just move the throttles off because it had the reverser on, and we'll be going through this in just a second on the startup procedure. And also down here we have got our autopilot system I'll be going through, and here is our parking brake, so we're just going to keep that on. Before we start up as well, I'm just going to go over some few things. By pressing Shift 4 we get the left hand panel, because in the virtual cockpit you are not allowed to change some of the stuff, unfortunately. But before we start up, what we're going to quickly do is, if you're on VATSIM for instance and you get a squawk code, this is where you put it in. So this one here, gotov, means ready, and when you actually want to squawk, you want to turn it to the AC position, which is the, I believe, squawking mode Charlie. And here is your master for it, so you can turn it on, and as you probably can see from these wheels, these are how you change the squawk codes. Here we've got our VR DME, which we can use. We can just turn both of these on. For the moment we can come to this at another point when I explain some navigation. And over here is our radio altimeter master, so we can turn that on just so that we don't forget later on. And if you need to know, down here is if you're not flying online and if you're just using the normal FSX ATC, then this is how you listen to the identifiers, for example VOR stations or different ATC if you want to choose COM1 or COM2. Now we've got that out of the way, we press Shift 4 again and we can remove this. Now we will go through the startup procedures. So first what you want to do is go to your fuel delivery panel, and we want to turn on, what I usually do anyways, is turn on crossfeed, your right fuel pump, and you can also turn on the crossfeed tanks here as well. Also make sure you got this flicked forwards. This shows the pressure for the gauges, it's basically a master for it. Now we've done that, we want to have our throttles at around about idle. And we want to next turn on the beacon light. Now this can sometimes be a bit difficult later on when we turn on lights. One little shortcut actually to do this is click this little panel here. You see we get this 2D panel. So this one here is our beacon panel, my yak, quite well named actually for a yak, but just turn that up. We also need to turn on our fuel valves, so these are for each engine, so we'll turn them on for all three. So you wait for the lights to come on, and you can right click them to cage. So I'm going to turn off this panel here, and we're going to go back to our starter panel down here. So this is where we control all the start settings. So as I said before, the top one's for the APU. Now we're going to use the engine panel. So we want to put the engine master to on. This bit in the middle, as you can see here, so this means for our left engine, lev. This means our center engine, centre din, and this is our right engine, prav. So we're going to start from left to right. So we want to put this to our left engine stack. So you can see if I click the different ones, it gets selected to these different places. So we want to select the left. And same principle as before, we want to click on the start setting. Now, I've got this set up as a key where I can quickly look at the engine panels, but what we need to do is quickly just hold it and let go. You can see that the starter now activates. We've got our N1 rising and also our N2. And usually it's around about, I think 35% N1, the engine actually kicks over. Oh, that was 25%. See how N1 kicks over, we've got a good start. And after it's kicked over, we can start the other ones. So let's start the center. Just tap it. Get the starter light here. And we wait for this to rise. So we're going to start the last engine now. Prav, just tap it. And sometimes it can be a bit finicky. You see it sometimes doesn't turn on. Sometimes you really have to sort of play with trying to get to start. Sometimes you might even need to hold it. So you can see it starts flashing. And you've really just got to be lucky sometimes. It's a bit of a weird error. There we go. You see, sometimes it's a bit, you have to be a bit lucky to be able to start it. You just have to keep tapping it quickly, or sometimes holding it. And we will let this come up. And while that's happening as well, we're going to turn on our generators here. So you can see we've got generators for each engine, and as I turn them on, they come online, like so. Now, once we've started up fully, and we can see that our engine gauges are at the idle positions, what we can do now is we can set these to neutral, and we can turn off the master for the engine. Now, we need to turn off the APU as well, because it's a bit of a glitch that the engines will surge in flight if we don't turn them off. So all we have to do here is we come back to this panel on the left, and all you really need to do is, of course, check it's running, come back to this panel, and for the APU part for the top, press stop. You can hear the engine noise for it stopping. And we can turn off the APU fuel valve. We can centerize this switch and turn it off and close the box. And now we don't need to worry about this anymore. Excellent. So now that the APU is shut down, we also want to come back over to the right, and what we can do is not forget our air stairs. So click the right one first to retract it, and then once you hear the noise finish, click the left to turn up the master. We can turn the cabin signs as well. We're also still on ground power, so what we need to do again is press Shift 0, open up this panel again, turn off external electrical power, and just close. Now we want to go on battery mode. You can hear the bell signifying that we have changed our battery source, and now the aircraft is completely completely independent to the outside world. We are now fully sufficient and reliable on ourselves. So now let's go through some taxi procedures. Firstly, let's push back. Okay, now that I have pushed back the aircraft and I have re-put our parking brake on, we can go through some other systems in the aircraft. One other thing we probably want to note at is the autopilot system. So press Shift 2 and we get this lovely panel here. And let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you to see visually. So this is our autopilot system. Over here we have the master switch, and we have this main big control in the middle, and we've got two other stuff at the top here which are also buttons. So this is a gyro pilot computer, so there is really no intelligent aspect of it, maybe only the altitude hold setting, but you control everything yourself. So you can see I can click up, I can click down, and I can also tell it to go left and right. And all I'm doing here is telling it what degrees to turn. For example, if I make it go to the left here to 15, this would have signaled the autopilot to turn left 15 degrees, and I'll demonstrate this when we're up in the air. One also nice notable feature to know about here is if you click in the middle here and don't have any plus or minuses showing up in your little mouse icon, just click and it centers everything. This also means going up and down, and we can't see anything visual here because it's based off our vertical speed indicator. We'll go through it in a little bit. And this setting here is our altitude pitch hold. So this controls the rotation of the aircraft left and right, and this controls the rotation of the aircraft up and down. Well, that's the basically master for it. So we'll turn this off for the moment, and we actually need to let this warm up because it's a gyro pilot system. So we actually need to click this into the up position, and as you can see, nothing really happens. That is because we have to wait until this light here, Готов, which means ready in Russian, to illuminate before we can use the system. So basically, flick this switch up like so, and just forget about the system. And it should be ready when we actually come to depart the aircraft. Now, before we taxi, we want to turn on our taxi lights. There's two things we need to do this. We first need to extend our lights out, and the next part can be a bit finicky to use this switch, so you might need to click down here again, and all you need to do is click it up into up position. Cool, so now we have set everything up, we can now begin to taxi the aircraft. As you can see also down here, luckily this green light for Готов, or also it says here in the cockpit, because we changed to English, says ready. You can see this green light is now on, so we can use this in a little bit. We can release our parking brakes, and we can taxi to the active runway. You will need maybe quite a bit of power to actually be able to do this. The Yak-40 is definitely not underpowered, but it can be a bit sluggish at times, and just taxi it like any other aircraft. One thing you might also want to do at this time is extend your flaps, so you need to use a hotkey for this. The virtual cockpit stuff doesn't work for this as much, but just click it to one notch. And this aircraft has got 2 notches of flaps. The turning circle on this aircraft is really great as well, so it's really nice for small airports, especially with its short takeoff and landing capabilities. It's really great at that also. So let's just hold at the taxiway holding line here, and we can put just a little bit of idle power running. So there's a few things we need to go through before we take off. Firstly, this aircraft is very sensitive to how much power you give it. Again, it's an old Soviet aircraft, and you need to treat it with a bit of respect. You can't just fire all the power like that, because we have, well, as the word suggests, and there'll be a light come off as well, it will say that we have engine vibration if we leave this at a higher RPM setting. So at takeoff, I usually use full power, which is fine if we don't use it for ages. So basically, like any other aircraft, we do full power, and then I will retard the throttles a little bit to just get back into this blue band instead of in the orange or the red zones here. So there's a lot about keeping an eye on your different temperatures and just common sense to keep it into the blue arcs here. Another thing here is our airspeed indicator. Now usually you can fly this aircraft well down to around about 100 knots. In fact 100 knots is the landing speed I usually use for this. You can see the engine 2 vibration light went on there. It's a little bit finicky with my throttle controls. I have a reverse system on it, so that should not happen. But yeah, you can fly this aircraft to around about 100 knots just fine. That's usually my landing speed I aim for, which we'll talk through a little bit more. But usually I'll say climb out, just make it sensible. Don't go below 100 knots. We also hear call outs in Russian, and I'll also explain what each of these mean. But I would climb out around about 120 knots, or you could probably do a bit more. Just, of course, please follow these limitations here and don't exceed them. So flaps 20, maximum we can have is 150 knots. So please don't exceed these. Just climb at around about 120 to 140. Don't go above 150 knots until we retract the first stage of flaps. You also need to assign a hotkey for the gear. I just use the G button on my keyboard, but there is nothing to switch in a virtual cockpit, unfortunately, either. So you just have to do that. We got our indicator here, which is green at the moment, which will go red when it's up and locked. So that is all we really need to explain about that. We want to now put our lights into landing mode. So we just flick it all the way down, and now it is in the landing light configuration. Excellent. Let's start a little short taxi onto the runway. Usually use around about 50% power just to start rolling, and then I put down the power a little bit more to just stop us accelerating forwards. And let's line up onto the runway. This aircraft is really good at short takeoff and landing, so you can probably find you can take off from intersection departures. We're currently at Shimani Airport if you're interested as well. And we'll just use an intersection departure here. Okay, so now let's advance the throttles slowly until we just let it run up nice and slowly until we go to full power, as so. Your feet on the rudders, just making sure we're at the center line. And now we've got some call outs for the airspeed. There we go, and that means rotate in Russian, so we slowly pitch up until we're airborne. Now raise the gear by pressing G. You can see we want to keep into our climb speed, so around about 120 knots. And once the gear is up, we can retract the flaps. So I just commanded for retracting the flaps, and we are now climbing out. And honestly, this plane is very nice to fly. It's always a pleasure. It's very responsive and smooth. So now we're going to put down our throttle settings a little bit, just so that we're in the blue arc, like I was talking about. And we can see our speed is increasing. We'll probably climb around about 150 knots now. And we can see we've got a very good climb rate also. So this is probably a good time to demonstrate the autopilot. So let's open up the autopilot panel. And we can see that we are now in the Gotov mode, which means ready. What you want to do is click here to actually enable the autopilot. And you can see that if I turn my stick left and right, which I'm trying to do, nothing happens. Now the autopilot is taking control of this. You also want to enable the pitch hold mode, which basically holds this vertical speed. So now if I pull back on the stick, I don't know if you can hear that, but that is why the autopilot is taking control fully of the pitch and also roll of the aircraft. So I'm going to just make this a bit smaller so I can actually see outside. And all I'm going to do is demonstrate a 15-degree turn to the left. We will just click this over to 15 degrees, and as you can see, this line on the side here will come to this 15 degrees point, and we will maintain this quite nicely. again, if I want to go right, I can click right to 15 degrees and also do this, and it will turn 15 degrees to the right. And also, as demonstrated earlier, if you click in the middle, it will centralize it immediately, so we go back to 0 degrees of roll. Now, as you can see, we're still climbing, and for instance, I want to hold an altitude. Let's say I want to hold around about 6,000 feet, so we're approaching that quite quickly. All you need to do is click the top of this and hold it until the vertical speed indicator starts to decrease. It happens quite slowly, so you need to quite plan this in advance a little bit. And this basically decreases our climb rate. So now that we're at 6,000 feet, as soon as we hit it, we want to click this button here, like so. And this is our altitude hold button. So now that I clicked it, at the point I clicked it, it will hold the altitude. So it will start to pitch down a bit. I hit it around about 6,100 feet-ish. So it's going to descend a bit to get to that altitude. You also find that cruising with this aircraft will be quite a high speed. You see I'm sort of around about 60% throttle at the moment. We don't really want to go into this orange arc, so I'm going to decrease my throttle to the climb indent, which is 50% throttle, and that will keep us at a very nice airspeed. So now that's the basics of the autopilot. There's one thing you also want to know, and one thing that I wish I knew at the start, is that you find that when you want to fly the plane manually, you can't, without having to turn it off and then wait about 1 minute, 2 minutes to get the autopilot back on. That's too slow when you're flying on VATSIM or IVEO. So one trick, and actually I don't know if this is in a real aircraft, but it's definitely implemented in this model, is you want to press your brake button. I am holding the period key for my brakes at the moment, and that is giving me control back to the aircraft. As you can see, I can turn the aircraft, and you can see that Takeoff light is re-illuminated if I hold it down. So basically, this allows me to fly the aircraft manually while holding this down. It also works if you've got rudder pedals if you hold down the brakes. So it allows me to fly it manually while it's still got the autopilot system activated, without having to turn it off. And what it also allows me to do, if I remember correctly, is I can hold it at a certain pitch attitude or turn. If I release this, of course the pitch will come back to 0, that's what we selected, but the climb will remain as what I had it before. So I'll take back manual control. It can be a bit finicky sometimes. I'll manually put it to around about 0 feet per minute, like so, and I can release. And it should hold it roughly around about there, as you can see. So that's a good tip to know about the autopilot system. That's probably my top tip and a hidden secret to be able to use this properly. So what we'll now do is I'll go through some of the navigational equipment and how to use it. So in your Yak-40 you will not have the GPS panel, unfortunately, though I am happy to give a model or upgrade your panel config for free. And to be able to do this, it's really easy. All you have to do is just use the standard Garmin GPS, and you can probably look online how to put it into a empty panel slot. So I just put it into shift 3, and it allows me to fly on VATSIM and stuff. I usually use VATSIM mainly to be able to fly to different waypoints and using GPS. So what I'm going to do is probably pick this VOR here. If I remember correctly, it is it's not quite the Shimani VOR. In fact, let's pick the Shimani VOR, which is SYN, and we can fly back towards it. So it's at 111.05. So how we input this in is press Shift 8, and you'll get this panel appear here. This is our COM panel, and you can see that we've got our course and our frequency that we want to put in. So let's put into here 111.05, and we will select our course of let's choose a back course. So let's choose maybe the 360 radial. If you don't know about radials or VOR navigation, then feel free to skip this part. This is more for the advanced pilot. So now that we've got this radial selected and this COM frequency here, we can close this panel because we've got our frequency inputted, And as you can see, our panel here, our auto direction finder, is not actually locked onto the signal yet. So how do we do this? And this is a common problem that took me a while to sort of figure out, is that we click this panel down here, and you can see it's got our VOR 2 on. As you can see, this panel has now moved, and it will now show the 360 radial to the VOR, which we can use using our autopilot. I'm just going to do altitude hold, and we can turn towards. Now we can go through some other navigation steps, for example using the ADF or the NDB frequencies, which we use on the top overhead panel here. So you use Shift 6 to be able to access this panel, and you get this sort of old vintage style looking radio at the top here. So firstly, we need to turn this on. So this switch here, we want to turn on to the first position, which is compass, which you can see illuminates the panel, and we get this little VU meter or power meter at the top of what our received power of the beacon is. So how we input our frequencies, we've got a left and a right, or ADF1 and ADF2, which we can control using this top switch in the corner here. It's a bit hard to see, but this chooses our active left or right ADF frequencies. So let's pick one. If I look at my ADF frequency list very quickly, and let's just choose this AR1. So it's a bearing of 163, and its frequency is 290.0. So we use this ring here, and you can see this actual lever here sometimes hides it, so don't worry about that. But it's 290.0. So let's put in 29, and you've got this outer ring, sorry, if we need to use to put in the other frequency. So 29, and then what you do is use this small little knob here to do the finer increments. 290. Excellent. So now it should, well, possibly because we're out. You can see now I've actually put that in. I'm just doing a quick turn to get back to Shimani, so ignore that in the background. But as you can see, we've got 290, and what you actually find is on the ADF, I know we're a bit out of range, but this will lock onto it as any other ADF, and we'll get a signal meter telling us if our signal is increasing and decreasing. And you can use two of these at the same time, so you can turn this one on, and you can use this for ADF navigation, which I find is a lot more accurate and a lot more easier to use as well. But you really got to plan your ADF beacon, NDB beacons along your route. So let's close that, and let's head back to Shimani, where I will demonstrate how to land the aircraft on the ILS system as well, and how to get that all set up. So while we make our way back to Shimani, we can now put in the ILS frequencies. So much like we did before, we want to press Shift 8 so we get this comm panel back up, and we want to put in the ILS frequencies. So for example, for ILS runway 01, we are able to put in 108.10. So 108.10, and our course, I'm just going to put it to the rough course. On your Citizen Stars, you'll see what course to use. If you've done ILS before, you'll know how to use this. I'm not going to go in how ILS works, but this is where you put in your course, and sometimes right-clicking panels make them disappear, as you can see. But also, if you right-click some of the buttons, if I start making mistakes, it actually increments it a lot quicker. So this can be quite useful. So I'm just going to set this to 1010, as so. Now, because it's the ILS frequency, much like we clicked this button down here, we need to set this to the ILS mode. So we need to click this again. If you hover over it, you should see a tooltip come up. It'll probably say nav RC VR or something like that. VOR mode currently, because we put it in the VOR mode. So you need to click this again so it sets into ILS mode. You can see nothing really happens. In fact, I'll demonstrate when it's coming landing. I'll click this again and you see the light come off. But this switches us to ILS mode. So I'm going to head towards the runway, and I'll explain more there when we're on a short final. So, let's go through on how to start a descent in the Yak-40. So, this is a very sensitive aircraft to the engines. So, usually on descent, you want to set it to probably just below the cruise setting. I usually set it to around about 25% of my throttle quadrant, and this just stops us from overspeeding down here. So while we make our way back to Shimani, we can start our descent. You want it to be around about 1,000 feet per minute. This is usually good. You can trim the aircraft nicely to match that. You might need to go a bit less because actually this aircraft is, even though it doesn't quite look aerodynamic, it can be quite good at descending, but also quite quickly. So we are approaching Shimani now. You can see I'm a bit off the ILS course, but that's completely fine. And we'll just turn in towards the airport. So just before we land, I think it's best if I explain a few things just before we do. So usually what I like to do is put my flaps 1 down around about 150 knots, just to give us a bit of a braking effect, in fact, to slow us down. You can see that we can put our gear down at actually 160 knots, so quite a high speed, just this top band, but we're not going to do that. We're going to put it just around the time before we put down our second stage of flaps to 35 degrees, which you can see is 135 knots, right around about here. And you will notice a lot as well when putting the flaps down on this aircraft that you really need to push forwards and your sight view changes a lot. So that's something to be aware of as well. And remember, we aim for around about 100 knots or 110 maybe knots for your touchdown speed. Anything higher than that, you'll probably find you'll float as well. So another thing you've recognised if you've got a very good eye at spotting stuff, you can see this has changed to the ILS that we put in. So we can say that we're actually slightly below the glide slope, so that's why I'm holding this at altitude right now. But like I was saying, for this little panel here, which you click on, if I click on it, you see this VOR 2 light comes on, and basically the glide slope line will just remain stationary. It'll just stay there and won't actually move, because all it's using right now is basically using ILS as a VOR beacon, which is not how you're supposed to use it. So we want to get rid of this VOR 1.2, and we click on this to the ILS system. And this also activates on the right here our inner, outer and middle marker beacons when we actually fly over them. So we can see that we're starting to get to the ILS a little bit, so I'm just going to command a small, maybe just above a 15-degree turn until we start flying through the ILS. You can see our centerline needle is passing through us here. That means we can turn this off actually, and we don't want to overshoot because then we're going to have to turn left again. But what I'm going to start doing is just get ahead of the aircraft by actually slowing it down, just so that we're in this white arc a little bit. In fact, something I should mention here is on our left of the panel here, we actually got a DME reading of how far we are from the airport. So we're currently 14 nautical miles away, so not too long. So cool, we are roughly at our course heading. And you can see that the glide slope needle is also starting to come down as we start to match it. So I'm going to turn off the autopilot, simply click both of these down, and I am getting ahead of the aircraft just by placing us in the white arc a little bit. So I'm going to take manual control. You'll probably find you need to trim the aircraft a little bit. You can see we've got our runway ahead of us down there. So some final things we want to check up on. We've got our fuel on, we've got our landing light on as well, that's quite important, and we want to just keep a good eye on our airspeed as well as our ILS, or if you're not using ILS, just looking at visually as well. You use a lot about looking at your airspeed and matching it as well. Of course, I'm adding a little bit of throttle just so we just keeping the tip of this white arc, because I want to be able to have our landing gear come down. And of course, you're going to have to trim the aircraft a lot. This aircraft is a real bugger when it comes to trimming. So I'm just going to fly this ILS all the way down, and I would say just when you're starting to descend properly on the glide slope, or actually just really by feel. When you start to feel that you should put one stage of flaps down, we will do that. We'll see we're a bit too far at the moment, and also I'm not within my limits of 150 knots to be able to put them down yet. So let's see what we're doing there. We're right on target. And if we look at DME, just for accuracy, we're at 9 nautical miles, so we're getting quite close. And roughly about 3,000 feet. So I'm going to say maybe around about 3,000 feet exactly. I'll put down one stage of flaps, which will be indicated over here, of course. So let's slow down so we're actually able to do that. In fact, you might even have to go idle. It's a lot about being ahead of the aircraft. So I'm actually going to go and let the glide slope drop a little bit, because when we put flaps 1 in, we actually see that we're able to descend quite quickly. So we're going to just pitch up a little bit so I can actually slow down to around about 150 knots, where I'm going to put in first stage of flaps. And also pitch down while we're doing it, otherwise we're going to balloon or rise back up. And as you can see, our airspeed comes down quite quickly, so things happen quite fast. So now I'm going to try and get back onto glide slope. You want around about 25 to 50% power here just to maintain airspeed, even in descending, and I'm going to trim it out. So what I'm going to do is, you can see I've got my gear warning on. That's what we put our warning signal on from before. So I'm just extending my gear right now. There we go, it's extended. If I go back into the cockpit, we are aiming for around about 120 knot descent. And as we get closer to the runway, we're going to put in full flaps. Sometimes you don't need full flaps, though I just suggest it when you're sort of learning aircraft, because you're going to need it at one point. But usually for long runways, you can just get away with one stage of flaps. So you can see I'm a little bit below the glide slope, so just pitching up a little bit. Might need to trim it out just a little tad again. And what I'm going to do, around about this distance here, I'm going to put in full flaps. So you'll notice when I put in full flaps, we're going to really sort of pitch down, and I'm going to need to apply almost 50 to 75% power to keep our airspeed. So there we go. So here's the next stage of flaps coming in, and I'm going to throttle up just to anticipate it. You can see our airspeed's coming down quite low. As you can see, our flaps also extends quite a long way down. So I'm actually around about 50% power right now. A little bit maybe too much. So I'm just going to tad it down a little bit. It's a lot about feel. And as usual, I'm probably not going to get a good landing on film. So I'm going to probably put it around about 30%, just so that when we're descending, by the time we get to the touchdown zone, we will actually be around about 100 knots. Just a little bit far up still. You see our sight picture right now, it almost looks like we're hitting the ground, but that can take a little bit of getting used to at the start. So here we go, we're a bit high still. About there. Very nice. So trim it out a little bit again. Get into around about 100 knots, as you can see. And I'm going to try and keep it there, because this aircraft likes to sort of get in the ground effect quite easily. See, it can be really tempting to get above the glide slope because of your weird pitch angle. So here we go, we're roughly around about 100 knots. Right at the touchdown zone, we're going to slowly pitch the nose up while retarding the throttles, and we slowly pitch the nose up like so. It almost looks like we're level, and there we go, we have now landed. So we can put our brakes on. It's also got a reverser at the back, which we can use. It's a bit it's effective-ish. It's more if you want to get into small airstrips, you can use that. So there we go, we've got our reverser in, we can disengage it. And we are now at a nice speed to be able to taxi back. So I'm going to cut forwards until I get to the parking bay, and then we'll go through the shutdown procedure. Okay, so now we're exiting the runway. We can retract our flaps, and as you know, this little button here, we want to go back onto the taxi lights. And I'm going to choose my favourite, standard park, number 3, because it's just a straight in. So we're going to taxi in quite slowly, just keeping the centre line in the middle, and the nose wheel is actually behind us a little bit, so we need to account for that as well. So I would say roughly when this line gets to maybe around about this little door frame part here, you can see I overshot because I was changing the camera, but when this door frame part sort of gets to the line, that's about the place you want to stop. So let's put our parking brake on, and we can run through the shutdown procedures. So let's first do good etiquette and put our light switch to neutral and retract our lights. Now we want to go to the box that we went and talked about earlier. We can open this up, and it's your choice if you want to start the APU, exactly the same process as before. What I like to do as well is you want to quickly open up this panel again for the external power, and just quickly turn on the external power, and you can close this again. So now we go for the shutdown procedure. It's very simple, you don't even have to worry about arming it. Just choose the engine you want, so I'm going to choose the left engine, and you need to click on this stop. This what this says here in Russian means stop, or it literally says stop, and just tap it, and literally that shuts down the engine. So you can do this for all of these, and neutralize it and close. And as you can see, our N1 and N2s are coming back down along with the temperatures. So while this is happened, we want to go back to ground power, exactly the same as we did before. So this yellow light means that ground power is available, and we literally click this down. We can also turn off the beacon light, which is at the top here in this corner, and also we want to turn off these fuel valves. So again, this top panel, uncage these and turn this off. Ooh, sorry, you don't want to do that, just leave them off. You want to come back down to your fuel panel. In fact, I'm just going to get this out of the way first, and you want to come back to your fuel panel, and you can turn off your fuel systems, so your left and right, and your cross feeds, like so. It's your choice if you want to turn on the pressure gauges as well. It's not really necessary. And if you actually want to put this plane back into cold and dark, it's completely your choice, but you just have to follow the procedure that we went for the startup. So that's an overview on how to fly the Yak-40. I hope you have learned how to fly it, and I hope you enjoy flying this aircraft in the future.